everyone, it's Meg, and today I'm going to be talking about my favourite books that I have read in 2021. 2021 was not the best reading year for me, unfortunately. I did not meet my Goodreads goal. I read about 20 less books than I read the year before, which is kind of disappointing, but not the end of the world at the same time. And just generally, I think the books that I did read, I just didn't love as much. So this time, I usually do a top 10 in these videos every year. However, this is going to be top 8 and 3 honourable mentions because I just do not have enough books to meet a top 10. I feel like I had about 11 books in my video for it last year. So I'm going to talk about those today, and I must admit the books that are on this list I do love. They were just, they just hit me. They were just so good, and I will definitely be rereading the majority of these in the future. So I have a variety of books. Quite a few of them are historical fiction, which is actually rather exciting. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you guys about these books today. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So I'll start off with the honourable mentions. So these are books that I really loved, but just didn't have that quite edge to make this list. So the first one that is on that list is Blood Moon by Lucy Cuthue. This is a novel in verse. This is a book about periods, shaming, sex, social media, and kind of the power of that and how it affects everybody, but especially young women. And this is just an incredible book. I read this, I did a vlog somewhere. If you want to go and find that vlog, you can go and watch it, where I read this book and I read it one evening. I sat down to read it. It was meant early read, maybe a chapter or two, finished the whole thing because I could not put it down. This was such a fast-paced book. I did read this quite a long time ago, along with obviously a lot of these other books, but it was just one of those books that had such a profound impact, and once I started reading it, I genuinely could not put it down. There are so many important topics that this book discusses, only a few of which I mentioned just before, but this is honestly an incredible book, and there's lots of feminist themes in it, which I really love as well. And honestly, I think everybody should read this book. No matter who you are, I think you should read it. I think it should be almost required reading. It is so important and really an eye-opener, and I feel like a lot of people, especially kind of in the later half of secondary school, would really love this book as well. Next up, we have The Ringmaster's Daughter by Carly Shabelsky. This is the first book that I read in 2021, and it's a historical fiction which is a World War II, and it takes place in Paris. And it's basically about this guy called Michel. I don't know if it's Michel or Michael. I'm going to go with Michel, maybe. And he basically ends up on a train for a circus, and he ends up becoming part of the circus. And even though this is a World War II story, it is also about the lives of these circus people and the secrets that they are trying to hide from the Nazis as they begin to invade France. And like I said, it's more about the characters than it is about the time of year that it's set in. But this is a beautiful book. That's how exactly I would describe this book. It is absolutely beautiful. Like, the writing is beautiful, kind of the relationships between all the characters, the story is just absolutely stunning, and I did really enjoy it. I don't typically read World War II or kind of war books. They're just not my cup of tea. I don't like reading about that era, but I do, like I said, this is definitely more about the people than the time that it was set. So honestly, it's such a beautiful book. If you are looking for a really beautiful book, like I said, how many times am I going to say beautiful, with wonderful characters, beautiful storyline, and a really just generally good historical fiction read, I definitely recommend this. And the final honourable mention I have is Full Disclosure by Cameron Garrett. And this is a YA contemporary, and it's about our main character Simone, who is HIV positive, and it's just basically about her and her journey being a HIV positive teen and kind of what that means to have HIV at this time. And I learned so much from this book. I didn't know that much about HIV before going into this book. But honestly, it's so educational, and I also really love the storyline. I love the characters, I love the representation in it. Just a really incredible book, a very quick read as well, but also a very important read, as well as touching on obviously HIV and learning about it. It also touches on racism and a little bit of feminism and many other things. So again, a really good read, but just didn't quite make the top list, even though I don't know why, because I rated this 5 stars and I can't fault it, but it just didn't quite have that edge to make it onto my top list. So those are all of the books that are kind of my honourable mentions. Now we're going into my top list for the year. So the first 3 books are kind of in my 8, and then the other ones are like my top 5 books that I loved, couldn't fault, absolutely adored them. So the first one that I have is kind of in my top 8 is Date Me Bryson Keller by Kevin Van Wy. I read this I read it just before my Pride vlog last year, and this book is just such a joy. That is how I would describe it. And I'm sure many of you have heard of this book and what it's about. It's a YA LGBTQ plus romance, male-male romance. It's absolutely beautiful and it's a very heartwarming and wholesome book, but at the same time there is definitely more grit to it. It talks about some important topics such as obviously coming out and being queer, but also religion and the relationships between religion and LGBTQ plus community. And I just honestly, I adored it. It was so wholesome and wonderful, but definitely packed a punch at the same time. I was rooting for the characters and I just absolutely adored it. So if you need a pick-me-up, I definitely recommend this. And I cannot wait to see what Kevin comes out with next, and this is a book I'll definitely be rereading in the future. Then of course it would not be a end of year favourite list if I did not have a volume of Hotstopper on it. So obviously Volume 4 of Hotstopper by Alice Oseman, it's always on these lists that I do. I really enjoyed this. I don't think it was my absolute favourite. I think Volume 3 was my favourite that is in the series so far, but obviously I adored it. There are a couple of pink tabs, and this, obviously you should all know about the Hotstopper series, but this mainly follows in this one Charlie's journey with his mental health, with his eating disorder. So obviously trigger 1 for eating disorder and also self-harm in here as well. And it's kind of about obviously Charlie dealing with that, but also Nick dealing with it and trying to figure out how to help Charlie, even though there's not that much he can do. But it's just really beautiful, really beautiful. Next element in the story. The next volume comes out. I don't think it's coming out this year, unfortunately. I think it's actually coming out next year, but nevertheless, absolutely adore it, and I cannot wait to read the last volume, even though I'm going to be very sad that it is finally over, but it's a series I'm definitely going to be rereading time and time again. Next up we have a graphic novel, which is the Dragon Tapestry by Kay O'Neill, and I read this book, which is the last book in this little series, and I also read the Tea Dragon Festival as well, which is like a prequel to the Tea Dragon Society, which I read last year, year before actually. I'm getting all mixed up now. And I really enjoyed this one. Out of this one and the Tea Dragon Festival, I did prefer the Tapestry. I don't know why, I just preferred it a bit more, preferred the story, and it's just such a wholesome series. Like if you want to pick me up, you need to read this series. It's just about these cute little tea dragons and the villages that they live in, and it's just wholesome. The art style is absolutely stunning, and I need to own a physical copy now. So I will have to get one of those at some point, but absolutely adored this and definitely had to be on this list. So now we're on to my top 5 for 2021, and I have some excellent books to talk to you guys about. So the first one is The Island Home by Libby Page, and this was Libby's latest release that came out last June, I believe, and I read this mainly whilst I was on holiday. I did read it in a bit of a vlog, which again you can go and find, but I adored this book. This is a book that's mainly set on some remote little Scottish islands, and it is about family and friendship and art and just love and like female friendship in particular and community. It's just such a beautiful story. I've loved every single one of the books that Libby has written and come out with so far. This was no exception. It's one of those books where I could not get tired of reading it. Like every now and again when I'm reading a book I need to have a bit of a break from reading, but I could honestly read this book all day. I absolutely loved it. The characters are amazing, and I just love the setting of this really remote island, and it's also very similar to kind of my experience of living in a village, because obviously, but different. The same in the fact that you have this community that's very like tight knit, And I really love that, and the female friendships in this are just exquisite. I love them so much, and I really love the family dynamics in this, and honestly just such a stunning book. And as always, I love Libby's writing, and it just made me want to go to a little remote island off the coast of Scotland. But honestly, I really adored this. I don't know, it might be my favourite Libby Page book. It's really hard to choose because I love all of them so much, but absolutely adored this, and I think she might be coming out with a new book either this year or next year, one or the other, but I'm very excited to read that one as well nonetheless. The next book is Still Life by Sarah Winman, and this is another release that came out in 2021, and I was very excited to read this book, but also very apprehensive because Sarah Winman is one of my favourite authors, even though I don't talk about her that much anymore on my channel. And the last book I read of hers, which was Tin Man, I did not like. I loved her other two books but did not like Tin Man, so I was very apprehensive about this book, and it took me quite a long time to read it because I started reading it, then I put it down to read some other books for some readathons that I was doing, some other videos I was doing, so it took me quite a while again, but once I picked it back up and really got into it, I just fell in love with this book. I didn't give it quite 5 stars for the fact that it just took me so long to get into it, and I think that probably doesn't help for the factor that obviously I put it down for a certain amount of time and the beginning doesn't grasp you straight away. But honestly, once I got into this book, I adored it so much. And this is quite a difficult book to explain. I feel like all of Sarah's books are quite a difficult book to kind of explain what they're about, because you don't really know what you're gonna get into until you start reading the book. But this takes place over a number of decades, and it mainly follows our main character Ulysses, I think is how you pronounce his name, Ulysses Temper, and it also follows Evelyn Skinner, and they meet in Italy during World War II, and then they kind of part and they never see each other again. And then it takes place, like I said, over many decades. It starts in around the 1940s and this book finishes in about the 1970s. And it just follows the lives of Ulysses and his family and his friends and the community that he is a part of. It's set in London, part of this book, but it's also mainly set in Florence in Italy. And I know that Sarah went and stayed in Italy, I think, and did quite a lot of research into the city, and you can tell it from this book. It's just absolutely exquisite. This book also talks about art, as I think Evelyn is an art specialist. I think she's kind of very knowledgeable in the kind of art sector and genre, which is amazing. But the thing that really made this book for me was the characters. Like, obviously Sarah captured the essence of Italy just perfectly. Like, it was dripping with summer. This book takes place for all seasons, but it just also feels like a really summery book, which I really love. But like I said, the characters made this book for me. They are a very complex group of characters. They were all very mixed up in terms of their relations and how they know each other and how they're related to each other. But they make their own family, and I just find that so beautiful, and you get to see them grow over the years, and it just warms my heart. Honestly, I would love to be a part of this crew that's in here. It's just really, really beautiful, and I really loved how the story ended as well and wrapped up. And there was just lots of discussion. There's some good LGBTQ plus representation in here as well. And even though there isn't a lot of dialogue directly from the characters in this book, they don't need to say a lot, if that makes sense. So honestly, just a beautiful book, and I highly recommend, if you haven't picked any of Sarah Winman's books up, highly recommend that you do, because they are just absolutely stunning. And after this book, I cannot wait to see what she comes out with next. We're down to the third book now, which is another historical fiction, and I actually have this one and another historical fiction, which is rather exciting. I love that I've got so many historical fiction on this list this year. So that third book is the Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner, and I read this for the Fall into Autumn readathon, which I did with Kira from Kira Foster, so you can go and watch that video if you want to kind of hear my thoughts on this book. I do have a recent reads as well somewhere if you want to go and check that out, where I talk about this book, and the same with all of these books that I have read. I will try and remember to link my recent reads playlist if you want to hear more expanded thoughts on these books. But this is a book that is set during and mainly just after World War II, about a group of characters who live in the village where Jane Austen used to live, where her original home was, and basically this book is kind of set up as a story where they're trying to save Jane Austen's original home and make it into a museum, and that is part of the story, but it's not the main plot of the story, and it doesn't happen till halfway through, and this book is rather short, but it's mainly about these 8 main characters and what Jane Austen means to them, and it's about their relationships with each other and the community that they've built together, and it's just, again, it's such a beautiful story. And as a Jane Austen fan, I really loved seeing the discussions that they had with each other about Jane Austen's novels and kind of their opinions on them, and it's just really insightful kind of seeing that in a book. I just found that absolutely wonderful. And like I said, it's just such a joy, and also there is definitely some like feminist themes in here, which I also really loved, as obviously it is a very different and expanding time for women at the end of World War II, because obviously they did a lot of the jobs back at home that the men would have done, but obviously they are fighting, so it's time for women to kind of reach a bit more independence. They want that independence and their own power, and also about what it's like to be an actress kind of during that time, as one of our main characters is a Hollywood actress, so there's lots of different themes about that as well. It's just beautiful, honestly, I love this. If you're a Jane Austen fan, you need to read this book. Definitely recommend. And Natalie Jenner has another book coming out this year called Bloomsbury Girls, I think, which has one of the main characters from this book in it, which is very exciting, and it's about the publishing industry, I think, like women in the publishing industry in like the 1960s, I think. I don't know much about it, but I know I'm going to read it, but absolutely love this, and will definitely be reading Bloomsbury Girls when it comes out later this year. We're on to the second to last book now, and obviously when this author brings out a book, like I said with Hotstopper, this book always has to be on this list because she can do no wrong in my eyes, and that is Laura Wood and her new book, A Single Thread of Moonlight. And I did a full spoiler-free vlog for this book, so again I will either link it down below or go and find it on my channel if you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts in this, because obviously you can see all the annotations, so you can see how much I love this book. And like I said, this is a historical fiction set in Victorian England. I think it's Victorian. I get mixed up between Victorian and Edwardian, but I'm pretty sure it's Victorian. And this is quite different to Laura's other books. It is a murder mystery-esque book. It is also a Cinderella retelling, and I love this book. And the main character, Iris, is probably one of my new favourite main characters ever. And like I said, it's a murder mystery, which is very different to Laura's other books because they're kind of romances, but also about these independent women. This book still is. There is still romance in this book. It's still about our main character Iris wanting to be independent and kind of all that sort of thing, but at the same time she wants revenge, and I just loved that. And I love the discussions in here about feminism again, and also there's some LGBTQ plus rep. Specifically, there is a main character called Cassie who is like ace aero on the spectrum of that, which I just love. I love seeing an asexual representation in a book, especially a historical fiction book. Like, I really hope she's in Laura's next book, because if she is, I will love that so much. But obviously, like I said, this book had to be on this list. I absolutely adored it. Laura is coming out with a book later this year, and I just cannot wait, you know? I think it's going to be absolutely exquisite, and I can't wait to read it. And my final book on this list, which is probably my favourite on this list because it is exquisite. It is a book I've not stopped thinking about since I read it back in like March, April time last year. And that book is The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow. This book is like the dream for a Pride and Prejudice fan, for a Jane Austen fan. Like, if you love Pride and Prejudice, you need to read this book. Like, I think it should be mandatory. It is so good. In case you didn't know, this book follows the middle sister of the Bennet sisters, Mary. The first part takes place during the events of Pride and Prejudice, and then the rest of the book takes place after Pride and Prejudice, a couple of years after, I think, actually. And you take it through Mary's journey, and from where Mary is at the beginning of the book compared to where she is at the end, it's just so much growth. Like, we love that, and you really learn to root for Mary. Mary is just, you just love her, you root for her. She goes through so many much growth and so much mistakes, but she learns from it and she ends up with a beautiful life by the end of it, a life that she is happy with, and you just love that for her. And obviously, like I said, the first part of the book takes place during Pride and Prejudice, so you get to see that story from Mary's perspective and her feelings and thoughts and how she was kind of going through that stage of her life during the story, which is really interesting. And you also get to revisit many of the characters that we know and love well from the original story, like Mr. and Mrs. Collins, and also like Bingley and Darcy. And you also get introduced to some new characters, which I think Jane Austen will be proud of, because the new characters just fit in with the original story so well, and the original group of characters so well. And I just love this book so much. You will be rooting for Mary. Obviously you can see my tabs, like I have so many discussions on this. I really wished I'd done a reading vlog for this book. Maybe I will when I reread it, because I will definitely be rereading this book throughout the years. It was one of those rare books where as soon as I finished it I wanted to pick it up and start reading it all over again because I loved it that much. And this book is about 655 pages, but if you want to read this book, don't be intimidated by it. Honestly, you will never get bored reading this book. It is just such a joy and you will fly through it in no time, and it's a serious serotonin boost. If you need a book that is going to make you smile and make you happy, you need to read this book. It is absolutely fabulous, which is exactly the reason why it is the top and my favourite book that I read in 2021. So those are my favourite books that I read in 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, even though I do not have a top 10 this year and I didn't have the best reading year in general in terms of how much I read and the types of books I read, the ones that are on this list are honestly absolutely wonderful. I did read some excellent books. A lot of them did come out last year, but honestly they were excellent and they brought me so much joy. I will be rereading them throughout the years and I cannot wait to see what is in store for this year. There are so many wonderful books coming out in this next year and I cannot wait. It's going to be so exciting, and it's just, yes, I'm ready for all the good books that 2022 is going to bring. Let me know in the comments what some of your favourite books are that you have read in 2021. I'd love to know whether it's some books that I have mentioned on this list. Maybe you would like to read some of those in 2022, or maybe your absolute favourite book that you read last year. I would love to know, as always, in the comments. If you guys like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more bookish videos from me, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you'll be noted every time I post a new video. As always, I will leave the links to my social media along with the links to my Goodreads in the description down below for you guys if you would like to see more bookish content that you will not find on this channel. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!